Democracy, Contempt of Voters, and Ideology. This is the third of three. Let's have a look more carefully at what it is to be voted in. There's a common belief that there are two types of responsibility or duty an MP might have, which are exclusive. You either have a delegated individual who has to, who's duty bound to do what voters want, literally, or you have a representative that can do what they like in the name of the best interests of voters as they deem them. Well, there's nothing to stop someone elected in to have a combination of these duties covering different areas. There's no doubt that in a democracy that has any future, that an MP must feel or formally have a delegated responsibility to promote democracy, protect the value of the vote, and do what they can to ensure that the democratic system works well and is respected. As you can imagine, ideologues don't fancy that sort of thing. They see democracy only as a means to an end. Once they get power, they will swiftly act to censor and control voters, to turn democracy into really a useless quadrille, rather like in the Soviet Union when they had a tiered voting system. But surprise, their selectocracy involved demanding that any candidate should be a member of the Communist Party, which rather produced a fait accompli. You were voting, by definition, for an ideologue, which effectively meant that you were confirming that your vote was worthless. This is an empty quadrille of appearances. And we had the same, or have the same in the UK, where over the last, God knows how long, at least 40 or 50 years or longer, you had to conform to party line to the extent of being almost mindless. The ideal MP or candidate for MP would be someone who would toe party line and change their minds conveniently the moment the party changed line, which is really pretty ropey. And consequently, we'll end up now with a bunch of MPs who are not too unkind by it, but really they lack agency. They don't have minds of their own. They're only interested really, in effect, although they may feel dreadfully virtuous, deluded in the manner of speaking, to the fact that they're out for one thing, number one, which is very much how Bernays would like it. The famous manipulator, which I mentioned before. He's hugely important. I strongly recommend you put in E. Bernays propaganda into Google. You will find a PDF version of his famous, infamous essay called Propaganda. Once you read that, you'll begin to understand what's been going on, particularly in recent years when Thatcher gained power and they're using Saatchi and Saatchi. That was introducing in a concentrated form E. Bernays type methods into our electoral system. It was a very clever, I suppose, idea, but too clever by half, because it created a selectocracy, which in effect meant that, for instance, in later years, the Conservative regime, some 13 odd years, or whatever it was before Labour came in recently, was little more than a continuation of Blair's project. And the Labour regime that's come in now is just that on steroids. With Burnham coming along, of course, you will have something more concentratedly ideological. Burnham is a nice enough chap, and he has a sense of humour, which was City Boris Johnson. It's very attractive in a world of humorless, robotic people to have someone coming along and make a quip. For instance, when he was being worshipped in the Commons, taking the oath of loyalty, which of course he didn't believe a word of it, but he knew he had to do it. Some backbencher from another party said, he looks as if you're a messiah, and he turned around and said, no, I'm a very naughty boy. With reference, of course, to Monty Python. And of course the Commons erupted in laughter. Very clever. Humour in politics is essential and can be quite radically effective, because at least it gives the impression that you're a human being, which makes Burnham even more dangerous, because he's an ideologue. And ideologues, when push comes to shove, will stick humanity on the bonfire of political theory and utopian delusion. For our own good, of course. It's a bad old scene. Anyway, back to the delegated aspect. MPs have an absolute delegated responsibility to ensure that their temporary vested authority is not abused, is not contracted out, worse, contracted out on a permanent basis to third parties. Now, they have effectively done that if for ideologues, because they've contracted out their thinking to a political theory. The mental algorithms dominate their thought, so that they unconsciously come to conclusions about politics and about society and what should be done, in absolute isolation, considering what their voters think or wish. So they're using a process as a means to an end, ostensibly to feel virtuous on the side of goodness and ideological correctness. Conveniently, however, it enriches them. Most MPs are public sector charity type operators, or they come from social services or whatever. That's fine and dandy, but they know absolutely nothing and have no respect or wish to know in many cases for fundamentals of economics and for the very invidious position which they're in. No MP can totally represent their constituents because there are as many opinions and beliefs as there are people, and so there's immediately a need for compromise on the part of people who didn't vote for them, and compromise on the MP to do their best to respect the interests of those which go against what they may intuitively think is correct, without letting down the people who voted for them. That's a very complicated thing. And what happens instead, though, is that when constituents kick up, MPs just don't listen to them and become very hard to contact. I can't blame them, because it's one hell of a job. You have, in effect, if you're going to be a successful politician, to be quite good at lying, which is not necessarily bad. It may be a necessity, given the fact that society is full of contradictions and inconsistencies. But the important thing is that this process involves trying to make the most sense possible out of society and trying to then work in the directions that is the best that can be done in the circumstances for all your constituents. That needs a lot of thought, and ideologues are incapable of doing it. There's only one right, and it's not what people think or want, it's what the theory says. So they get around that problem entirely. It's rather nice, and they're selected on the basis not of how good they are at listening to constituents or any nonsense like that, but how good they are at towing party line and ideological correctness, and how venal they are, manipulable by the whips. In other words, if party policy change, shall we say, net zero is ditched by Burnham, the MPs, many of them, will just troop along and say, what a good idea. whereas a few days before they might have been saying exactly the opposite. I must admit, net zero will be pushing it. Maybe Burnham can't do that because they're so strongly ideologically wedded to certain things. But there are other things, which he might be able to do to an extent. Burnham's largely a prisoner of the ideology that brought him in. So he's going to be dangerous because his capacity to listen is pretty low. Not zero. In the case of Steiner, it was zero. He was a really strange man. But Burnham is a bit more flexible. But in terms of his appreciation of very basic things, such as supply and demand, he's a disaster waiting. And it may just be a matter of time before he tries to order supply and demand in such a way, rather like King Canute's courtier suggested that he could do to command the waves. And of course the courtier was made to look a fool, which is what Canute wanted, because the last thing he liked was people who were keen on licking an unmentionable part of his body. Got to be a bit coy about that. Licking his backside, let's be more blunt. And of course that sent a message out to the rest of the court that good information was wanted, not BS. King Canute's, the story has been turned against the king because people didn't really appreciate what a clever person he was. No, not clever, wise. Clever people can be very stupid, as Academia proves, just monumentally stupid. And as their ignorance about democracy is outstanding evidence of their lack of will or courage to take it seriously, because they're imprisoned by the idea that everything has to be non-contradictory and must be consistent, unaware that the very nature of reason depends upon respect, on giving temporary meaning and respect to contradiction itself, to avoid the law of non-contradiction imploding on itself. It's a strange mental blind spot they have. Understanding this is as significant, I think, to society and politics as as zero was to numerals, calculation, mathematics, physics. You can go on and name it. An incredible discovery which, with hindsight, was pike obvious, but somehow people didn't get it. It's the same with the idea that respecting contradiction is not stupid. It's kind of the opposite. We would be robotically stupid if we didn't respect contradiction. You should rather explain a lot of the stupidity in modern politics. Ideologues are, in essence, completely and utterly artificially stupid. It's really close to criminal because they have the mental capacity. They're not fools in many cases. Often they're highly educated and very clever. You can do crosswords and stuff which would, do clever things with mathematics, completely beyond me. Yet me, little me, managed to get out the three paradoxes of reason. They've always been there. I just uncovered them. There's no genius in that. Possibly the only good part is the capacity to left field thinking and an unwillingness to accept canons of rationality, such as knowledge is power. No, it isn't. The supervisors at the Bhopal plant that blew up knew it was going to go up, but did the shareholders, stakeholders in Union Carbide? Of course they didn't. They were made impotent because information flow was inadequate. So the wretched people in Bhopal running that plant must have known, and they must have, when it actually blew up, they must have, oh my God, it's the ultimate horror of ignorance. Almost deliberate ignorance by a company that certainly didn't want its stockholders to know what was going on. And that's the same with undemocratic countries. Information doesn't flow properly and you get similar sort of chaos. ghastly consequences. And that's why democracy is so important, because it's all about information flow, the generation of political and social power, a very well informed executive, people by those of right character. I mean by that, people not naturally malign, and there's a lot of them around, unselfish people, has huge power to get things done. And of course, the nature of things that want to get done will be related to the importance or the essential nature of ensuring information flow. And that includes, among other things, a reasonably good educational system so people can express themselves, levels of health so they're not incapable of saying things, and many other factors. I can't list them here now because I'm speaking live, but you can look around and see these prerequisites of democracy. And unless they're there, information flow goes wrong, people blame it on democracy, and they think an authoritarian can, as it were, make the trains run on time, can force people and society to behave, so therefore we're forced to be good, and all good things will follow from there. Of course, if you use force, there's an element of fear, people clamor shut, information flow collapses, and then you get ignorant people in authority who, they got a Hobson's choice. If they know they're ignorant and don't take any decisions, events will prove that that is a criminally bad decision, because chaos and mayhem will result. On the other hand, if they take decisions in ignorance, what they intend is not going to happen. What happens is in effect the impotence of unintended consequences. This illustrates the fact that authority is not power, that power is a construct relying on the combination of information and authority metamorphosing to produce power. So strangely, which is rather nice in democracy, the prerequisites of democracy necessarily involve respect for human rights, which lead to good information flow, which lead to the power to get things done, and maximum cooperation. It's very ornate and very simple, it's a delight. But explaining this, you look in the academic books on the subject, they have no idea, because the academics have not taken democracy seriously. Instead, they've been in love with closed system theories, axiomatic ones, the Marxism and possible fascism. And then, of course, you've got the hundred variants of Marxism and victimhood and so on and so forth. And then on the philosophical side, you have one of the most criminally bad philosophies, which is Wittgenstein's, which in effect destroys philosophy. Whatever people say, the linguistic philosophy that followed is arid, empty. When I studied ethics university in the 1977, we spent a long time arguing about the logical properties of the word good applied to bacon sandwiches and sewage effluent. I think it was R.M. Hare. Absolutely staggering. And meanwhile, people being blown apart in Birmingham and elsewhere by people, very likely people who had a point. Blowing people apart wasn't the thing to do, but they were they were politically isolated and weren't being listened to. It only took Mo Mowlam and later, possibly the greatest success of the Blair regime, and I didn't think he had many successes, and the expansion of Quangos was a political disaster under Blair, but as well as the Supreme Court to an extent, and the human rights stuff that came in. Democracy should determine human rights, not judges. That's really quite important. So, I'm a bit off the theme here, but the point is that democracy is a very great system. It's highly sophisticated. I just touched on some areas. I mean, you can go on again, and you can. How do you elect people? Proportional or first past the post? You can have them both. The lower house of Commons could keep its powers and still retain first past the post. The upper house maybe should have no legislative powers, but rather like the EU Parliament, the right to block. And that could be purely proportional, in the most pure form. I'm sure there's different types of proportion, we argue that all day. But so one could be the brake on the other. Then you could change the system to elect the other house so they don't all get elected on one day, but it could be a rolling system. Maybe 10%, maybe whatever it is, 25% each year will get re-elected. Or it could be even more sophisticated. You elect the individual sort of areas every 2 or 3 weeks. So one week it might be Rotherham, the next week it might be Manchester, whatever, and so on, right across the country. So it rolls all the time. So that would stop. So when the politicians in the lower house go a bit crazy, as they did recently with Starmer, and as they did under the Tory party with their ridiculous fixed term parliaments, which involved creating a government of minority. Of course, then Bercow appeared and tried to set up a sort of rival government in Parliament. I mean, absolutely balmy, but with an upper house that had the ability to call things to a halt. Maybe we'd add to the top one of the powers might be 75% of the upper house declaring a must-be election. Remember, they're voting proportionally and not first past the post. Then they could force an election. And we would still keep otherwise the right to call an election with the Prime Minister of the House. No problem with that. So, yeah, democracy is complicated. Just like delegated representative aspects of an MP's responsibility are not exclusive. You can have a bit of both. So it is with proportional voting and first past the post. It's quite ornate. And this sophistication and talk about democracy just doesn't happen. We need highly intelligent people. And I'm not intelligent. I just happen to have a mind to left field way of looking at things and connecting stuff together which people don't normally connect together. That's my gift. But the rest, I'm not intelligent. Hopeless at crosswords. I can't do quizzes. Mathematics, people who make numbers dance, frustrate me because I'd love to be able to do that. Absolutely fantastic. I have trouble getting to grips with calculus. I mean, that's fundamental. It's a wonderful thing. In ancient Greece, oddly enough, Archimedes managed to do a sort of calculus without algebra, using geometry. Absolutely unbelievable. Elements were found in the recent palimpsest. It's a sort of a prayer book which used parchment from previous works, and they just scraped off the top and put their prayers they did in it, what have you, on top. And they discovered that in his palimpsest, underneath, was work by Archimedes. It's fantastic how much there is out there. So, democracy is very great. And I could go on more about how censorship develops in authoritarian systems and how it is still important in a partly democratic system, but how as democracy develops, so censorship should fall away. With ideology, as the ideology develops and gets a grip, censorship gets more extreme. So it's the other way around. But there's not enough time to do that here. I hope these three have been useful. Do think more about democracy. Don't dismiss it out of hand. When you understand it and appreciate how it can work, it's a very clever system, and more so, it's the one that generates the highest political and economic power. It's fantastic. And the authoritarian system goes the other way. In the end, it destroys what democracy builds. Thanks for listening. I'll shut up now for a few days.